Diehl's entry into M&A with this Preventio deal signals maybe a strategic pivot to enhance these digital water capabilities, which are becoming ever so important to some of these players in the water sector.
I am Reese Dizdal, and this is The Future of Water, in which we talk about all the ways which companies, utilities, people are addressing the challenges and opportunities in water. This is episode 110, and I know it's going to be a good one. That's because, one, it's the first of 2025. Happy New Year to everybody. But also, I'm going to be joined by Bluefield analyst Mike Muroff. As you may have seen on the Bluefield Research website, hint, hint, we recently released some analysis on Diehl Metering's acquisition of Preventio, a software company. Diehl Metering is a metering company based in Germany, which I believe is in the top 5 to 10 of metering companies, according to our market share globally. So I thought it'd be great to have Mike on to discuss his research, the topic, but also, metering and what this might mean, but also what else is happening in Europe, as we've discussed, I think, somewhat on this podcast as well. More specifically, what's happening in Germany with its economy, energy prices, and also to some extent, Diehl's role in the Russia-Ukraine war and what this might mean. So the economic and geopolitical events in these markets, in Western Europe in this case, are also influencing company strategies and deal flow. So hopefully this will be a good one. I'm looking forward to this conversation. But before we do that, you're going to have to bear with me for at least one more minute. Let me talk about what's caught my attention recently. All right, so I'm flying back from a client meeting in Phoenix last night. Shout out to the client and their team. Thanks for the invitation to participate in your strategy meetings. That was great. I thought it was productive, educational in many respects. But as I'm getting on the plane, or at least flying out of Phoenix, out of the desert, looking in the rearview mirror and thinking about things like the California wildfires, climate, and always, as I do, water and the water sector and what this might mean. So not only are these fires a reminder of the challenges facing all these communities in Southern California, families, homeowners, but also friends, and what they're having to go through. So with hundreds of thousands of people being evacuated, chances of us knowing someone impacted increases exponentially. In fact, I just learned this morning about someone I know. So increasingly, we're all in that boat, and it's pretty scary. So, our thoughts are going out to those people in Southern California. But in terms of this episode, it also highlights how we manage and safeguard water supplies, but also infrastructure as well. And I say it over and over again, and I wish I'd coined the phrase, if climate is a shark, water is the teeth. So, in terms of why does this matter? As I was talking to client Phoenix just the other day, and that is, I was looking through some NOAA data. We've actually have some of this presented to clients. And we've looked at about 385,000 climate-related events across the U.S. since 2000, so past, I guess now 25 years. And not a small number of events. Their damages, property damages, totaled about $558 billion over that time. And about 80% of those are water-related. So, it showcases what the role of water plays in all of these events, which are driven by other reasons, which we can get into. But I think the point is, in this case, let's just tie it to Southern California. It continues to face drought conditions despite the above average water years over the last 2 years, in 2022 to 23, as well as 23 to 24. However, the current water year is falling behind significantly already, with regions like the Santa Monica Bay watershed receiving just 0.23 inches of rain since October 1st, which is well short of the 5.69 average, 5.69 inches at this time. So it's just an indicator of what the region faces. And to put it in perspective, the Palisades fire is burning in a region that's critically dry compared to the previous years. So admittedly, this is a good example of the problems and challenges we face with climate change. It's really a confluence of events. The high winds were coming. There's dry fuel base in the region. It hasn't been raining, so it's not wet enough. And then all it takes is a spark, and it's gotten away from us. And that's one of the challenges, and obviously in a highly populated area. So while not directly water related, water plays a role. And so now the question is, if we're not going to do anything about it, I mean, if the water supplies are climate related, then we reduce carbon emissions and hopefully that solves the problem. But we're obviously not doing that. So we're sailing past our targets. So in frustration, perhaps right now, maybe it's just I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, but I think we just need to start focusing more on adaptation. And that's learning to deal with it, with a situation that we have created in some respects. But what does this mean for water infrastructure? So, if we're not going to do anything about the emissions and the climate overall, let's look at infrastructure and what this might mean. So, hopefully, it goes without saying, firefighters rely on water from reservoirs, hydrants, storage tanks for effective suppression. Everybody talks about water, utilities, and infrastructure really in terms of drinking water and emerging contaminants and wastewater collection and treatment. And the one thing that everybody seems to overlook, if you think about it, water infrastructure is also critical to risk mitigation and fire protection. Out of curiosity, as I was on the plane flying back, I went into our data navigator, which is Bluefield's data visualization tool, to see that the most recent forecast that we put out this past year shows the fire hydrants in the US spend on them, capital spending, is approximately $8 billion through this decade. So it's not an insignificant amount for those little stumps sticking up along the city streets as you drive by. And in my case, you can't park at, otherwise you're going to get a pretty steep fine. And then separately, storage tanks, about $12 billion dollars through the decade. So we're looking at $20 billion on two pieces of the puzzle that are related to fire suppression. I'm not even talking about reservoirs. That's not in our capital forecast. But then you get into like leaky pipes and water pressure, which is what people are starting to raise Cain about. But the reality of it is there's massive demand on water supplies right now because people are trying to protect their properties, whether it be the firefighters or individuals themselves. And so we do need to think of that. So next time a congressman, a city leader, manager pushes back on infrastructure spending and or raising rates for things such as this, I'm not saying they're wrong to push back. What I'm saying is we do need to keep in mind if the climate in regions like the West, and you could extend this to places like Australia or Spain as well. We get wildfires in the East Coast as well. But in fact, where I live and just outside of the city of Boston, that's in fact an issue. We need new water tanks. And part of this is because of fire risk and as a buffer for our own safety. And there's pushback. It's expensive. That's just where we are. Everything is expensive these days for whatever reason. But keep this in mind. There's a real impact of water infrastructure and how we fight off climatic other events such as wildfires. And then I think the other thing to think about is, unreliable water systems. Outdated and insufficient infrastructure means delays and gaps in these firefighting efforts. It puts people's lives and property at greater risk. So investing in resilient water systems, it's not just about daily use. It's about being prepared for the worst when it does in fact happen. So as I've discussed with clients and others, previously, water infrastructure is in dire need of investment. We can't wait for another crisis, whether that be the Great Recession or the COVID pandemic and the long-awaited infrastructure week to address critical infrastructure such as water. The Great Recession injected just shy of $6 billion into the water and wastewater sectors. And then IIJA has put in $55 billion of new infrastructure investment. But the IIJA, that spending comes to an end in just a matter of years. So into 2026, and then the party's over. And then what? So I think my question to the incoming administration and Congress and political leaders is what happens after 2026 when all those funds come to an end? So with that, and not to be too depressing, it's just something to think about. I think we just need to start thinking about solutions. Let's move on and get to Mike Muroff and talk a little bit about Diehl Metering, Germany, and what's happening there. All right, so I'm joined here by Mike Muroff. Mike, how's it going? Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you. Doing pretty well.
How were the holidays?
It was good. I went back to New York, visit my parents, had some family over. So definitely a nice break and nice time to catch up with them.
Yeah, I was saying to someone the other day, it was feels like because the holidays, Christmas holiday was middle of the week, the New Year's holiday is middle of the week. It's a long holiday. I don't know. I mean, you're a lot younger than I am, but it feels like the longest one I've ever had as far as just like being out of the office for the most part in terms of this time of year. So, in any case, that's not why I brought you on to talk about the holidays or Jefferson, New York. What I wanted to talk to you about is right before the holidays, there was some activity in terms of M&A, and you work on our M&A and company strategy service. And one thing you worked on was a recent deal where, that's no pun intended, Diehl Metering made a deal. Diehl Metering chose to acquire Preventio, which is, I guess, a software company. You can give me more details on that, to support the company's digital strategy overall. And so Diehl Metering, Germany based. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on the deal, sort of what it means at a high level, and then we can jump into more details.
Sure thing. So you're absolutely right. So this is Preventio is a German-based company, was acquired by Diehl Metering, part of the larger company Diehl Group. And essentially, what we see here, it's I think the interesting part of this deal, again, it's kind of funny to say deal, but excuse me if I say that a few times. But I think the interesting thing is not so much the size of this deal, it's really about the underlying technology solution that Preventio offers. It's not a terribly large company. It started in, only a few years ago, 2021, I believe. And it's really the value that lies in this platform. So it's in what we would, by all accounts, consider an early stage startup company. And I think the real power of it is that Preventio has this AI powered solution for leak detection and predictive maintenance, pipeline risk scoring that really helps Diehl Metering push toward that realm of end to end water solutions, which it's always been trying to do. So I think it really signals this adjacent step into remote asset management for Diehl Metering. They've been trying to grow this analytics and services business, which Diehl Metering started in 2022. And really the hallmark of that analytics and services business unit has been this water loss management solution. So under that umbrella, the water loss management solution is a map-based monitoring tool. Preventio really sort of can be integrated into this tool and enhance those capabilities with more advanced analytic features. So I think this really comes at a good time. Diehl Metering has posted some really impressive growth, about 20, 21% year over year growth. So really sort of highlights the strategic value of investing in segments like this.
And Deal is not it's not a small company. I mean, it's been around for some time. It's fairly well diversified. Maybe we can get into that as far as total revenues and things such as that. But how does this deal? I mean, I hate saying this. I agree with you. This is
right.
Terrible. As I had a conversation over dinner last night, is the English language is far too complicated and silly.
That's right.
Get into personal stories, like how many ways can you say to? You can say TO, you can say TOO, you can say TWO.
Right.
It can be a little maddening at times. So deal's deal for Preventio. How does this acquisition position the buyer deal in comparison to its competitors? I mean, why are they doing this, and what are we seeing in this metering sector as a whole?
Sure. And I think that's always sort of as part of this service for M&A and top company strategies. We're always trying to think about how does this acquisition really stack up against other like acquisitions that competitors make. So that was featured in this, research note and this piece of analysis that we did. We wanted to really dig into what are some other players in the peer group doing. So some of the things that we've noticed were that Xylem and Itron, two other pretty significant players in the space, have been really expanding into analytics and IoT, so doing more software-based plays, while other competitors like Camstrup and Badger Meter are pretty focused on more hardware solutions. And this is, again, that's sort of broad strokes, but that's how we kind of divvied it up. And, just for example, Xylem has in our database for M&A, we've seen that they've acquired really 10 digital targeted acquisitions, a few of them that come to mind, Mnet, Valor, Water Analytics, among others. So Xylem has certainly been pushing more into that realm. So it's not an anomaly, right, that Diehl is making this kind of acquisition, certainly following other playbooks that other companies like Xylem or Itron have been making. So I think, yeah, so the thing to really think about is Diehl is sort of carving a niche in this connected solutions space. And it really represents, from what we can see, Diehl has made or at least engaged in some type of corporate partnerships since its founding as a segment in 2010. But it really does signal the first acquisition by Diehl Metering since 2010 that we've seen. So certainly an acquisition that we haven't seen from this particular segment of Diehl Group in quite a while. So I think Diehl's entry into M&A with this Preventio deal signals maybe a strategic pivot to enhance these digital water capabilities, which are becoming ever so important to some of these players in the water sector. So one partnership that kind of came to mind that is outside of the realm of M&A again, and in other ways that Diehl is engaged with other companies and trying to expand their portfolio and platform is through IoT. And we see that Diehl's previous investments or partnerships like its SaaS IoT service, its partnership with Stackforce, which is, I believe, another German company, emphasizes its role and focus in really trying to build out this embedded connectivity software solution.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I agree. How does it stack up against its peer group? I mean, putting that in perspective, I guess, peer group being, like you said, Xylem, Itron, Badger Meter, Camstrup, those are some of the leading players. I mean, Diehl is, just thinking back on the research you put together, you said they're Germany based. I think their revenues are they're about a $4 billion US dollar company a year annually. And I think their metering business is about, I don't know, 450 to 500 a year.
That's about right. Yeah.
And I think, they're active in other sectors, right? Which is sort of part of the research, right? Is they're active in, I think, defense industry. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right. So if we're talking about the Diehl Group more broadly, I think it is an interesting story, trying to chart out what exactly does this company do. So you mentioned, you're right, it's a 4 billion US dollar company. That's certainly nothing to scoff at. And you say Diehl is a Germany-based company that has segments devoted to defense, aviation, metal controls, and metering, like we mentioned. And metering is about 11% of the Diehl Group's business. So, like you said, it's pretty roughly around what you estimated in terms of revenues. But the harbinger, or the really leader of its company-wide growth, is defense and aviation. That's sort of its bread and butter. But the interesting thing is, and I've pointed this out in the research note, Diehl Metering has been really posting pretty significant revenue compared to some of these other segments. So you have Diehl Metering growing around 21% year over year revenue. That's pretty significant, I would say. And this is coming at a time when, yes, defense and aviation are sort of the larger segments of the business. I think between the two, it's over half Diehl Group's revenues, right? But the thing that Diehl itself has mentioned in some of its annual reports and press releases and other discussions that they've had, the defense segment is really propelled by NATO contracts and defense spending in this war between Ukraine and Russia, which has been going on for a few years now. And aviation, again, another large segment of its business, has also been posting pretty interesting results. But also, I think what we're trying to put into this conversation is that defense and aviation, they've faced some pretty significant headwinds, right? And I think the long-term viability of those two segments, along with metal and controls, whether it be supply chain sort of issues with controls aviation. It goes without saying there has been kind of a lot of uncertainty surrounding aviation and sort of the manufacturing of planes and procuring materials for that. And there's a whole litany of issues that can affect these segments. And then you have defense, again, propelled by this war in Ukraine. And, I think you know, in terms of how long that war lasts and the appropriations, the procurement for that war, depending on how long that lasts, nothing's really certain. So I think out of that sort of those crosswinds and those headwinds that all those other segments are facing, metering emerges as a really particularly attractive one.
Yeah, it's kind of an uncertain environment. And I think part of that is, and maybe we can head into this too, which is for my next question, but given what's happening, we've got a new administration in the US coming in as well, which Trump and role in Ukraine. So that's there's this looming question: what happens with the US's involvement in Ukraine? And then at the same time, just I think, as I mentioned in the intro, I was talking about being in Phoenix. I was looking at the news or reading the paper, and they were talking about, I think the incoming Trump administration has talked about that European countries need to be spending at least 5% of their GDP on defense. So maybe that's ultimately good for those businesses themselves. But you've laid that groundwork, but there's some other things related, unrelated with Germany itself. So what trends in the European water market might be influencing this transaction? Are there other things in Germany that could be driving this?
Absolutely. I think there are certainly some significant macroeconomic challenges that the German market is facing right now. I mean, it's been covered pretty extensively in any publication you read, the Financial Times, The Economist, they've all been tracking this sort of stuff. But I think some of the pressing issues that the German market's facing, they're facing an energy crisis, partly and in large part, really, because of this war in Ukraine. Procuring natural gas has caused this energy price squeeze in Germany. It's affected it more acutely than other economies in Europe and the Eurozone. Germany also has sort of historically restrictive data regulations that have sort of impinged on water utilities and technology providers to seek out some of these innovative solutions. And that's all backdropped more largely by sort of tepid GDP growth that the German economy is facing. So you have all these competing forces, and many of them are not working in Germany's favor, and it's sort of spelling trouble for the market as a whole. So I think Diehl Metering being based in Germany, it's not to say that Diehl Metering doesn't have a vested interest in the German economy, nor does it mean that Diehl is moving from Germany anytime soon, right? I don't think anyone is speculating that. But I think it does speak to a larger question of, are there other geographic markets that are ripe for more growth in the short to medium term, as Germany is facing some of these secular, fundamental issues in its economy. And I think that's what we laid out a little bit in the research. I think it remains to be seen whether Preventio and this acquisition and the integration of the tools that Preventio provides into Diehl's portfolio, whether that'll be exclusively placed in some other geographic markets. But I think it is interesting to see that it may not just be a German-based play, right? It's just because Preventio is a German-based company doesn't mean that this is going to be exclusively rolled out in the German market. So I think the evidence we have for that, you see that Diehl Metering has had success in international markets in the past, like in the US and in Saudi Arabia, to name a few. Diehl did open a facility in Illinois in 2021. So that further supports their goal of trying to support a growing US customer base. The Hydrus 2.0 ultrasonic meters, for example, have been performing and selling really well in countries like the US, Italy, and Saudi Arabia. So those are just a few examples of some markets that might be pretty amenable to some type of innovation that Diehl can provide. And again, Diehl is about, and we estimated this in the global metering market report that Bluefield put out in 2023. And, it remains to be seen how that'll shake up. But I think it is the seventh or eighth largest metering provider in the world. So certainly, again, Diehl is not a small player in metering by any means. So I think it is interesting. You have this sort of confluence of headwinds in Germany, and I think again it does point to that question of where does Diehl go from here?
Yeah, and I think another thing to add, and sort of looking back at the German economy and infrastructure investment overall, is the role of, what's a better way to put it, the replacement rates for meters, right? In Germany, typically they've been replaced fairly quickly at a faster clip than what you see in places like the US. And the question is, if you're relying on that and the economy's facing headwinds, will there be deferred spending of, some cases where they start stretching out those replacement rates? I know for a extremely engineered place like Germany, that's probably anathema to their thinking, but it may be a reality that they face. And at the same time, infrastructure in the US has received some tailwinds, quite honestly, whether it be Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there's greater focus on it. We do see in our digital report that we released in Q3, Q4, 2024. So just recently for the US, metering is a big chunk of the digital spend overall. And like you said, we are seeing other companies, metering companies, whether it be Badger, Xylem. I mean, I think actually right before the holidays, Badger had acquired the majority stake in Idrica, which is a Spanish company that it had partnered with and made an investment several years ago to kind of streamline its overall metering businesses and activities, or at least help to do so. So, well, we've talked a lot here. So, is there anything else about Preventio's fit into Diehl Metering's broader vision when it comes to digital water, or anything else we missed? Let me leave it at that.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, we could sort of round out the conversation with that. And I think just to close out the last point that I was making in terms of what you just posed about the US and facing these sort of tailwinds from IIJA and IRA and some of these other investment appropriations from Congress in the United States, that definitely does drive a lot of this activity in the US market. And if you look at that comparable to what's going on in Germany, Germany's sort of faced, measured as a percent of GDP, public investment in sort of critical services and infrastructure in Germany has been trailing behind a lot of other neighboring economies and partner economies as well. So I think the fact that Germany is sort of in that heap of, or sort of that confluence of headwinds, as I've said before, is definitely not the most ideal situation for Diehl Metering to be operating in. But to answer the final question here, as you said, what does this mean for Diehl Metering and its broader vision? I think for one thing, this complements, as I said before, Diehl's existing tools, and the sort of predictive analytics piece that Preventio provides helps round out Diehl's water loss management software, as well as its IoT-enabled devices like the IZAR gateway solution that it rolled out not long ago, and really builds out, again, this end-to-end solutions framework. I think you have a lot of companies that strive to build out what they call an end-to-end solution. It's sort of a lofty idea, right? It's not always one that's easy to implement or strive towards. So I think you see Diehl is really making real demonstrable steps in that direction with this Preventio acquisition, delivering real comprehensive integrated solutions for utilities and industrial customers. And then the last thing I would say, again, and just sort of amidst this uncertainty, I think the Diehl acquisition speaks to how do companies scale amidst uncertainty and elevated uncertainty that we've seen for some time now. And metering emerges from these other segments that are facing significant headwinds from the German economy. And I think it provides a foundation, this acquisition at least, for scaling analytics-driven services and really points to how Diehl can address some of these broader market challenges like water scarcity and energy efficiency.
Yeah. So, all right. So then that was going to be my final wrap up question, which you nailed. I think, just so I'm hearing this correctly, and I don't know if I'm not putting this in any particular order, but I think your last point is a really good one. It's like, how does a German company, how does it scale in times of uncertainty? Like you said, it's got the economic problems, it's got the Russia Ukraine, which is impacting its other business. In fact, it's in many ways, they could be, one could argue that they're seizing on this opportunity with the windfall from, economically speaking, from Russia, Ukraine, and defense spending. They're taking that money and reallocating it into a sector that, like you said, has been growing 21% for them. And so they've expanded not all that long ago. They've got facilities in Illinois. The question is, will they push harder and harder into the US? You mentioned that they're in places like Italy as well as Saudi Arabia and other markets. So how to scale in times of uncertainty. And then maybe I'm double dipping here, and that is just geographic expansion, right? The digital sector, we're at the early stages, relatively speaking, of the digitalization of the water market. It's a tough market to enter into. When you're selling software and analytics, water utilities, they can't handle all of this operationally, financially, in many cases. So metering is one thing they do understand, and smart metering is a way of doing something, that they're already doing, but hopefully more efficiently while gaining something from it. They can capture billing data. So obviously if a utility is more efficient and using smart meters, maybe the cost of that information collection is cheaper, it's more efficient. It also these meters can be used in more real time to understand leakage and what's happening there. So it's something maybe closer to home than, let's say, digital twins, right? If you go straight from, I think we've put it out in the past reports and analysis, is sort of tactical decisions down to strategic, and meters, they're already replacing these. And so the overhaul of metering systems is happening in any case, from mechanical to smart. And, sometimes, and there are other issues related to that, but I think I'm probably talking too much, but does that make sense to you?
No, it makes absolute sense. I think you're right. I mean, again, just sort of figuring out how does Diehl hedge its bets in a way, or hedge its risks and invest in high growth segments of its company, and metering is absolutely one of them.
Yeah. And I think the other part of this, they've only had one M&A deal, right? Like you said, they've got the partnership in Germany, and then will we see more M&A picking up? It's been a little quiet particularly on the digital front, whether that's because of high interest rates, whether it's like you mentioned, Xylem had a slew of acquisitions, and now they're working with Idrica even more closely as of last month to coalesce that around a single package or a solution. So we'll see how that plays out. But with that being said, Mike, thanks a million, and for jumping on the podcast. And why don't you tell me, as I often ask, what are you working on that people can look forward to?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on an insight report tracking and profiling some of the top engineering players. So around 35 of the top engineering players, looking at sort of their revenue performance, some other strategic initiatives and activity that they've been doing, and what they've been up to more broadly as of recently. So that'll be coming out and slated to come out sometime soon. So be on the lookout for that if you are a subscriber to the M&A and top company strategy service. And then also, like you said, I'm interested to see what the M&A landscape will look like as we enter this new year. Will it pick up and will it rebound, as so many pundits and strategists have said? So I'm excited to see what other deals are being made in the water sector, from not only digital, but just other players more broadly. And I'm excited to cover that and other research notes moving forward.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Mike, thanks a million. Thanks for actually coming in early to get this done. I think I appreciate it, but I'm sure all the listeners will as well. So I'll set you free on the engineering firms, and we'll catch up later.
Sounds good. Thanks, Reese.
All right, take care. All right, that's a wrap for our 110th episode. So thanks for being part of the journey, not only in 2024, but also we look forward to hanging out with you in 2025. So once again, we're still excited about the coming year. I think we're always excited about the coming year and the future of the water industry and the innovations that lie ahead. So stay tuned for more discussions from people like Mike Muroff, but also a host of other analysts and expert interviews that I bring in here. Before we sign off, if you're in Boston, Barcelona, let us know. We'd enjoy the opportunity for a meeting. Please subscribe, give us a review, send us a note to waterexperts@bluefieldresearch.com with any topic ideas you'd like us to discuss. We're doing this for you. And lastly, tell a friend about it. And this podcast and these water industry insights have been brought to you by the one and only Bluefield Research. To learn more about us, visit us at bluefieldresearch.com. Until we talk again, be well, be safe, and take care.